We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph and Meseches Nedarim. This is Nedarim Daf 13a. On the previous Daf, the Gemara was discussing a situation where you have a piece of meat next to the meat of a carbon shlamim. And this meat of the carbon shlamim, at the moment, it's actually mutter because it's after Zrikas Damim. And so the person says, this piece of meat should be like that piece of meat. It should be like the meat of the carbon shlamim, meaning he's trying to say it should be aser. So do we say that it's aser because bi'ikaro kamatvis? He's saying in general, it should be like the meat of a carbon shlamim and it should be aser. Or no, do we say it's mutter because it happens to be the meat of the carbon shlamim that's right in front of us right now? The meat that's right in front of him is after Zrikas Damim, it's actually mutter, and therefore kidahashta kamatvis, and it's not going to be aser. And the Gemara suggests on the previous Amud that it's a machlokas tanoim, because we have a machlokas tanoim, a similar case. Let's say the person says this piece of meat should be like this piece of meat of the meat of a bechor. And the Gemara now explains the case. Isn't the case? The machis besar bechor, umachis besar dehech gabe. There's a piece of meat from bechor in front of us, and right next to it is the meat of this particular piece of meat. V'amar zeh kazen. The person says this piece of meat should be like that piece of meat. In other words, this piece of meat should be treated the same as the meat from the bechor. V'tanoihi, and it's actually machlokas tanoim, whether or not this works, and that's exactly the machlokas tanoim. As the Mefarish says, "V'yamar zeh kazeh v'hakam iflagi." This is exactly what they're arguing about. Mar savar bi'ikaro matvis, or mar savar beheter kamatvis lachar zrikas damim. One say that it's bi'ikaro matvis. You're saying that it's aser, like in general, this bechor is aser. And the other one says, no, if it's lachar zrikas damim, at that point in time, it's not aser anymore, and it does not create the prohibition. It's the exact same machlokas tanoim. And the Gemara says, lo, no, the kuli alma lefnei zrikas damim. It could be everybody agrees we're talking here about the bechor before zrikas damim. It's not after zrikas damim, and certainly in terms of the issue of what he's being matvis, so it should create an isser. Umay ta'ima demand and if that's the case, what's the reason of the one who says it's permitted? Because Amar Krakas, the pasuk says, ki yidor at sheyidor bedavar hanader. The case is, it says you have to, when you're doing this hatfasa, it says ki yidor, it has to be something that is nader, something that the isser is created through a neder, le'afuke bechor the davar ha'aserhu. That comes to exclude bechor, because bechor is really a davar ha'aser. It's something that's aser from the beginning. The fact that it's a firstborn animal makes it aser. It's not because of any neder that the person made. Uman da'aser, and the one who says it's prohibited, Amar Kratz, because the pasuk says la Hashem. The pasuk says la Hashem. It says ish ki yidor neder la Hashem, o hishava shvu, etc. And therefore that is an inclusion l'ravos davar ha'aser, and that comes to include even in a situation of davar ha'aser. So it has nothing to do with meikaro kamatvis or kedahashta kamatvis. It just has to do with whether you can do hatfasa with the bechor at all. Do we say that the bechor it's not going to be considered hatfasa because it's not a davar hanader, or we say no, the word la Hashem comes to include even a davar aser. And the Gemara continues, Uman deshari, now the one who says it is permitted over here, so la Hashem ayavidle, so what does he do with the word la Hashem? What does that come to include? Mi boile lamatvis bechatos v'asham. He uses that, he needs that word to include hatfasa. Let's say there's a carbon chatos in front of him, or a carbon asham, and he's doing a hatfasa with a chatos or an asham. So in that situation, that is sort of a davar hanader, because you actually had to do something to make the animal into a carbon chatos or a carbon asham. But on the other hand, it's something that you had to bring. It was an obligation. You're bringing it for a sin. So we're coming to include, the word La Hashem comes to include and says even that is considered hatfasa. And the Gemara says, but why do you see fit to include chatos and asham and to exclude a bechor? The Gemara answers, we include chatos and asham because at least there's a neder involved in that case. But we exclude the case of the bechor because that's wholly from the womb of its mother, and therefore there's no neder involved whatsoever, and therefore hatfasa will not work. And the Gemara continues, the Gemara says, even the one who says that the Bechor also creates an Isser, that's because that Man Damar holds that also is considered a Neder. Even Bechor, which is Kadosh Mimei Imo, but it is considered to have some status of a Neder. It's also through Neder. Why? The Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa, Mishum Rebbe Amru, they said in the name of Rebbe, Minayin Linolad Bechor Besoch Beiso. How do we know that if a Bechor is born in someone's house, Shem Mitzvah Lakdisha, that there's a mitzvah to sanctify it, even though it's Kadosh Mimei Imo, but there's a mitzvah to actually proclaim that it's kadosh. Shenamar, like it says, hazochar takdish, you should be makdish the zochar, and therefore there is an element of neder here, and that's why that could be included in hatfasa. Uman deshari, the one who permits and says it's not part of hatfasa, kilo makdish le milo mikdash, because even if you wouldn't sanctify the bechor, isn't it kadosh automatically, and therefore it really isn't a situation of a davar hanador. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said ki imra kedirim. If he says this piece of food should be ki imra, meaning like a lamb that's a carbon, korban, or kedirim, like the animals in the special enclosures that are for karbanos. So that statement will create the isra, and that food is prohibited to him. And the Gemara says, Tana was taught, Imra le'imra ke'imra, dirim le'dirim kedirim, eitzim le'eitzim ke'eitzim, ishim le'ishim ke'ishim, mizbeach le'mizbeach ke'mizbeach, heichol le'heichol ke'heichol, Yerushalayim le'Yerushalayim ke'Yerushalayim. In all of these terms, if you say this piece of meat again is like the lamb, or like the enclosures, like the wood, like the fire, like the mizbeach, like the heichol, like Yerushalayim, kulan, in all of these cases, sha'ochelach aser, if he says that I eat of yours, then it is forbidden, meaning he says what I eat of yours should be, ke'imra, kedirim, etc., then he creates a prohibition. But lo ochalach, if he says what I do not eat of yours should be like these things, so then mutter, then it's mutter, then he's saying everything he's not eating of his is going to be qualified ki-imra, etc., but the things he is eating is not a problem at all, so it's going to be mutter. And the Gemara now says, Man shaminan le de lo shani le imra le imra ki imra. Who's the Tana who doesn't make any distinction between imra, le imra, ki imra? It's all the same. Rabbi Meir, that follows the Tana Rabbi Meir. So Ema Seifa. So now let's look at the Seifa, the same brisa. It says V'kulan lo ochelach mutter. It says in all of these cases, if you say all the things I don't eat of yours, like we just said, then it is mutter. V'atanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, la karban lo ochelach. It says if you say la karban of the things I don't eat of yours, Rabbi Meir oser. Rabbi Meir says that it's prohibited in that case. V'yomer Rabbi Abba, and Rabbi Abba says Nasa ka'omer, that if you say la karban lo ochelach, the way we interpret it, it's as if he said la karban yehei, it should be, this item should be a karban, lefikach lo ochelach, therefore I won't eat that which is yours. In other words, when you put in the lefikach, so then the lo ochelach actually does create a prohibition. So at the end of this Tosefta, again, when it says lo ochelach mutter, it actually means lefikach lo ochelach. It really should be therefore I will not eat that which is yours, and it shouldn't be mutter. It should be aser for following Rabbi Abba's understanding of Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara answers, Lokash, it's not difficult. Hada Amar lo le'imra, Hada Amar le'imra. It depends. In this case, it's when he says lo le'imra. In the other case, it's when he says le'imra. If he just says le'imra, so then we understand it to be with a lefikach. He says it should be le'imra, and therefore lo ochelach. That's when it's going to be aser. But if he says lo le'imra, so in that situation, it's going to still be mutter. And the Mefarish explains, Lokash is not difficult, Hada Amar le'imra, meaning Masnisin, that's not lekamon do Amar le'imra lo ochelach. The Mishnah later on, that's when he says le'imra lo ochelach, meaning, Dahainu le'karbon, it should be le'karbon, Demashma le'karbon yehei, it should be a karbon, lefikach lo ochelach, and therefore, he's saying he's not going to eat that which is yours, meaning he is creating a prohibition if he phrases it in that manner. Ubraisa the katani mutter, and the brisa which says mutter taretz lahachi, you explain it as follows: to Amar lo leimra lo ochelach. He says it should not be for a carbon that which I do not eat of yours. Ha'im ochelach yehed keimra. Now, if you make an inference, it would sound like that which I eat of yours should be like a carbon, and it should be aser, but it's not aser. Why? Dahainu mechlal lavhein, because it's only aser through an inference from the implication of the negative. We're deriving the positive. Ulachi mutter. For that reason, it's mutter. To Rabbi Meir less because Rabbi Meir, again, as we've said previously, doesn't hold that you can prohibit something based on the inference, and that's why in the Braisa it would be mutter. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ha'omer Karbon Ola Mincha Chatos Toda Shlamim Shani Ochelach. If a person makes a statement, Karbon Ola, or it's a Mincha or Chatos or Toda Shlamim, that which I eat of yours, Aser. So the Tanakama says it's forbidden. Rabbi Yehuda matter, but Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutter. And the Mefarish explains, Ha'omer Ola Yehei Sha'ochelach, that which I eat of yours should be an Ola. O Mincha, or it should be a Mincha, V'chulu. In all of those cases, the Tanakama says Aser. But Rabbi Yehuda matter, Delo Amar Ki Ola, Ki Chatos. Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutter, because there's no chaf. He doesn't say ki ola. It should be like an ola. According to Rabbi Yehuda, in order to create the isra, you have to say that this piece of food should be ki ola. It's not enough to say ola, etc. And the Mishnah continues, hakarbon ki karbon, karbon sha'ochelach aser. If a person says hakarbon or ki karbon or karbon sha'ochelach, in all of those situations, it is going to be aser. Lekarbon lo ochelach. If he says lekarbon lo ochelach, Rabbi Meir oser. Rabbi Meir says it's aser. This is what we quoted above in Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Meir understands it to be lekarbon lefikach lo ochelach. Therefore, he's not going to eat it, and therefore it does create the prohibition. And the Gemara says, katani karbon hakarbon ki karbon sha'ochelach aser. The The Mishnah says if you say carbon, ha carbon, kik carbon, any of those phrases, it's going to create the Isser. Stama Tanak Rabbi Meir, the Stam Mishnah seems to be following Rabbi Meir. The Lo Shani Le, Bein Imra Le Imra, that Rabbi Meir doesn't make distinctions between saying Imra or Le Imra. It doesn't make any difference. But the Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, but if this is Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, Hadakatani HaKarban Sha'ochalach Aser, that which it says over here, that if the person says HaKarban Sha'ochalach, it is Aser. V'atanya, but we learned in a Braisa, Modim Chachamim Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim admit to Rabbi Yehuda, and the Chachamim here is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir admits to Rabbi Yehuda, Ba'omer HaKarban V'ha'ola V'ha'mincha V'ha'chatas, that if a person says HaKarban, or Ha'ola, or Ha'mincha, or Ha'chatas, Sha'ochalach, that I eat of yours, it's going to be ha-carbon instead of saying kikarbon. Shem mutter, in all of those situations, it's going to be mutter. Shalom nadar ze ela bechaye carbon, because when you say ha-carbon, it's as if you're saying by the life of the carbon. And the Mefarish explains, Stam Tanak Rabbi Meir lo shani le ben imra le imra. Again, the Stam Mishnah seems to be following Rabbi Meir, no distinctions between imra le imra, etc. The Asar hechadam Yerushalayim, command amar ki Yerushalayim. Rabbi Meir is the one that says Yerushalayim is the same as ki Yerushalayim. Ulhachi Asar hechadam carbon ke hechadam ke carbon. That's why carbon is a problem, just like ki carbon. But Rabbi Meir, but the problem is if it's Rabbi Meir, Reisha de Katani ha carbon sha'ochalach Asar. In the ratio when it says if the person says ha carbon sha'ochalach, that's Asar. But that wouldn't work with Rabbi Meir. V'atanya modim chachamim Rabbi Yehuda dahainu Rabbi Meir de Polagalad. Who's the chachamim? It's actually Rabbi Meir who argues on Rabbi Yehuda. Shelo nadar zeh ela b'chaye carbon. If you say ha carbon, you're actually making a neder by the life of the carbon, which is nothing. Techi amar ha carbon sha'ochalach mashma command amar chaye carbon. That's like saying by the life of a carbon sha'ochalach, that which I eat of yours. V'lo klum kamar, that's like saying nothing, and therefore that does not fit according to the sheet of Rabbi Meir. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis.